Okay, so we've got an interesting one today. This idea of voting being a business decision, you know? It seems like every election year people start talking about it like we're all suddenly CEOs or something.
Yeah, like we should just be looking at candidates' economic policies and ignoring everything else.
Exactly. It's all about what's going to be best for my wallet. But can we really separate our personal beliefs and our economic interests like that?
Yeah,
Especially when it comes to something as important as voting.
right. It's easy to say, but is it actually possible? Or even desirable? I mean, are we really just supposed to turn off all our other values when we walk into that voting booth?
And that's where things get a little tricky. Because, like it or not, our values are connected to how we view the world, including the economy.
Absolutely. We all have different ideas about what a fair and just society looks like, and those ideas influence how we think about things like taxes, social programs, even environmental regulations.
It's not as simple as just saying this candidate will make me more money.
Right. There's so much more to it than that. And that's why I think this deep dive is so important, because we're really going to try to unpack this whole business decision thing and see if it actually holds up to scrutiny.
And to help us do that, we're going to be looking at some commentary by Rachel Maddow.
Yeah.
And whether or not you're familiar with her work, she brings up some really interesting points about this topic.
Yeah, she really digs into this idea of voting as a business decision, and she doesn't hold back.
No, she does not. And she starts by looking at the actual economic data, comparing different administrations and their track records on things like job growth, GDP, you name it.
And she goes straight to the sources that people who think like CEOs tend to trust, like The Economist.
Yeah. She points out that they've actually praised the current economic situation, calling it a dream economy.
Which is pretty bold, but it's not just about cherry-picking positive data points. She also brings up a Wall Street Journal survey where economists predicted some pretty negative economic outcomes.
Yeah, under policies proposed by the previous administration. It's like she's saying, okay, you want to talk numbers. Let's talk numbers.
But let's look at the whole picture, not just the parts that fit our preconceived notion.
Exactly. And then she takes it even further. She starts talking about this idea that a more centrist candidate is inherently better for the economy because they bring stability.
Ah, yes, the old stability argument. It's a classic. Businesses love predictability, right? Yeah. Any kind of big change is going to spook the markets.
But is that really always the case? Maddow makes us question that assumption.
Yeah, she's like, hold on a second. Let's look at who's actually saying that and why.
Because she points out that the current administration has actually gotten endorsements from some pretty unexpected places. People who you wouldn't necessarily think of as being pro-big government or anti-business.
Right. And that makes you wonder what's really going on there.
Like maybe there's more to the story than just this party is good for business and this party is bad for business.
Exactly. It's way more nuanced than that. And I think that's what Maddow is trying to get at. We need to look beyond these simplistic narratives and really examine the evidence.
And maybe most importantly, we need to question our own assumptions about what's good for the economy and why.
Totally. Because what's good for one person or one group might not be good for everyone. And we need to be honest about that.
So how do we even begin to untangle all of this? I mean, it's starting to sound like the economy is complicated.
Yeah, it kind of is. But the good news is we don't have to figure it all out on our own.
Right. That's why we do this deep dive thing.
Exactly. So let's dig a little deeper into these ideas.
I mean, it's like those endorsements Maddow talks about. Are those really about stability leading to a better economy, or is there something more there?
Right. And like you said, it's easy to follow that thread and say, well, yeah, stability, good economy, got to be good for business. But it's like, is that really what's behind those endorsements? It might be political strategy, right? Or even just like some kind of personal connection where they actually believe in what this administration is doing.
So it's not as simple as just looking at which party someone usually supports and assuming that lines up perfectly with what's best for business.
Exactly. And this is where I think this business decision thing really starts to fall apart because, it assumes there's this one-to-one relationship between a certain political ideology and a strong economy. But history is messy,
Totally. I mean, it's not like there's a secret formula for economic success that only one side knows. Plus, when we talk about healthcare, climate change, social justice, reducing all those things to just numbers on a balance sheet.
Yeah, it ignores the human side of things completely.
Right. The economy is made up of people. And those people have lives, they have values, they care about things beyond just the bottom line.
Totally. And when we forget that, we end up with policies that might look good on paper, but actually make things worse for a lot of people.
Okay, but how do we actually put all this into practice? When you're staring at that ballot, It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the different factors.
Well, first off, I think it's about recognizing that there's no one right answer.
Right. It's not like a math equation with a single correct solution.
Exactly. And I think it starts with being honest with ourselves about our own values. Like, what do we actually care about? What kind of world do we want to live in?
And are we willing to prioritize those values, even if it means making some tough choices?
Exactly. Because sometimes what's good for our wallets in the short term might not align with what we believe is right in the long run.
It's like sometimes we got to make sacrifices, right, for the greater good, even if it costs us a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think voting is a perfect example of that. Like, we might be tempted to vote for the candidate who promises to cut our taxes or whatever, but if those cuts come at the expense of, say, education or healthcare.
Or the environment.
Right. Exactly. Then we have to ask ourselves if that's a trade-off we're willing to make.
It's like we're not just voting for ourselves.
Right.
We're voting for our communities, for future generations.
Totally. We're voting for the kind of world we want to leave behind.
And that's a huge responsibility.
It is. But it's also incredibly empowering, because when we realize that our votes have the power to shape the future.
It makes you want to make those decisions carefully, right?
Exactly. And it makes you want to be informed, to really understand the issues and the candidates.
And to not just accept those easy answers, right? Like the ones that just appeal to our own self-interest.
Totally. Because at the end of the day, we're not just consumers, we're citizens. And our votes are about so much more than just our bank accounts.
They're about our values, our hopes, our dreams for the future.
And our responsibility to each other and to the planet.
Okay, so we talk about how this business decision framework is kind of flawed.
Yeah.
You know? But like, how do we actually move beyond that? What's a better way to approach this whole voting thing?
Well, I think it starts with letting go of that need for like a simple answer, you know? Like we talked about, there's no magic formula.
No magic formula for the perfect vote. Because it's not just about economics. It's about our values, our vision for the future.
Exactly. And those are things we have to define for ourselves. Nobody can tell us what our values should be or what kind of world we want to live in.
Right. It's like we have to do our own research. Think critically about the information we're consuming. And be honest with ourselves about what we truly believe.
And sometimes that means challenging our own assumptions, you know? Like maybe we've always thought a certain way about a particular issue, but then we learn something new that makes us question our beliefs.
Which can be uncomfortable. Nobody likes to admit they were wrong.
True. But I think it's so important to be open to changing our minds as we learn and grow.
Because if we're not willing to do that, then we're basically saying, we already have all the answers, and nobody has all the answers.
Right. Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about this whole process of becoming more informed and engaged citizens. It's a journey, not a destination.
It's like we're all just works in progress.
Right.
Always learning, always evolving.
Absolutely. And I think the more we embrace that, the better equipped we'll be to make thoughtful decisions. Not just about voting, but about all aspects of our lives.
So as we wrap things up here, any final words of wisdom for our listeners who are trying to navigate this whole voting as a business decision thing?
I'd say don't be afraid to think for yourselves. Don't let anyone tell you that your values don't matter or that the economy is the only thing that counts.
Because it's not. It's all connected, right?
Exactly. Our economy should work for everyone, not just a select few. And the only way to make that happen is to vote for leaders who share our values and who are committed to creating a more just and equitable world.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.